Hey everyone, how's it going? So, today I'm going to be giving you a brief overview into moral anti-realism. Presumably you will have watched the video that it gives you a brief overview on moral realism. If you have, great. If you've not, I highly recommend you do so first. So, moral anti-realism, in case moral realism isn't true. So, moral anti-realism is the thesis that realism is false. And what that would mean is that one or more of the three-part theses that make up moral realism is false. So, just to remind you, the first thesis, ethical statements are truth-apt propositions. Now, I have a little correction to make. In the first video, I said ethical propositions are truth-apt. A proposition is definitionally a statement that is truth-apt. So, little correction to make there, but it doesn't matter much. Secondly, that some propositions can be known to be true. And finally, that these propositions are true independently of subjective attitudes and desires. So there are three main divisions of anti-realism. The first is non-cognitivism, which would reject all three theses. There's error theory, more frequently known as moral nihilism amongst the general public, that would reject the second and third thesis. And finally, we have subjectivism, which rejects the third thesis and has, in my opinion, quite an interesting view of moral language that we'll look at in a bit. So, J.L. Mackie was a philosopher that delivered one of the most famous arguments against moral realism. This argument is called the argument from queerness, because he basically argued that moral properties were metaphysically queer or strange, right? He said if there were objective values, then they would be entities or qualities or relations of a very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the universe. And the three things that he said that moral facts had, which made them objectionable, the objectionable features, were firstly that moral facts would have to be intrinsically motivating. So, for example, if you knew that stealing was wrong, that would have to give you a reason to not steal, and he didn't think that that was metaphysically tenable. Secondly, he argued that moral facts are not natural facts, and that they're not compatible with a naturalistic worldview, which is what he had as an atheist. And finally, he said that there's no purported human faculty that would sense moral facts. So it's important to note that some philosophers will disagree with Mackie's claims here, and I just want to give some quick counter-objections. So just because something is strange and different from other things in the universe, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? So consciousness, for example, is quite strange, and it's definitely, quote, utterly different from anything else in the universe, end quote. Right, but we still purport the existence of consciousness. Secondly, many moral realists do not believe that moral facts would have to be intrinsically motivating. Many moral realists either believe that moral facts are natural facts or don't see a good reason to say that just because moral facts are not natural, that means that they don't exist. And finally, many moral realists will either posit a faculty by which we can sense moral facts, such as a moral sense, or they'll argue that we can sense them in the same way we can sense descriptive facts, right? So one of the main branches of moral anti-realism is non-cognitivism, under which ethical statements are not truth-apt, right? They're not the kind of thing that can be true or false. So just to remind you what it means for something to be truth-apt, take the proposition Diddy is a criminal. Okay, that's truth-apt. That can be true or false. I'm going to say it's true. Don't support Diddy. That's a command. That's not the kind of thing that can be true or false. And finally, boo to Diddy, right? That's an exclamation. That's an expression of an attitude. That's not the kind of thing that can be true or false. So if we take the statement, stealing is wrong, the non-cognitivist would say that this is not a proposition, and it's not truth-apt, right? So some forms of non-cognitivism would be emotivism, which says that statements like stealing is wrong mean boo to stealing, right? The expression of an emotion. Another example would be the prescriptivists, who would say stealing is wrong means don't steal, right? The command. And finally, we have the quasi-realists, who would say that the statement stealing is wrong is an emotional attitude that's expressed as if it were a proposition. And I know that sounds complicated, and it's not super important to understand exactly how that would work, but that is a non-cognitivist view. So quasi-realism is sometimes associated with a view named fictionalism, which we will discuss later. So one of the main objections to non-cognitivism is the Frege-Geach embedding problem. So a lot of us like to engage in moral reasoning. Here's an example of a simple syllogism. It's wrong to tell lies. We'll say that's true. If it's wrong to tell lies, then it's wrong to get your brother to tell lies. And, the conclusion will be, it's wrong to get your brother to tell lies. So, P implies Q, Q. This is a simple modus ponens syllogism. The problem is that under a non-cognitivist framework, it's not clear how we can engage in reasoning using ethical statements because they don't have truth values, right? So, like, take this premise, don't tell lies. Okay, that premise is not even true, so we can't even evaluate that premise as true or false. Then take this entailment. If don't tell lies, then, it's don't to get your brother to tell lies, or we could even say, if don't tell lies, then don't get your brother to tell lies. It's not clear how exactly that entailment would work. Like, the antecedent there, right? If don't tell lies, that can't even be true or false, right? So, this is a problem that we get with the non-cognitivist framework. It's not clear how we can reason using propositions that can't be true or false. Now, there are some purported solutions to the Frege-Geach embedding problem, but they are very complex, far too complex for this video. Another branch of anti-realism is error theory, which is what most people are thinking of when they use the phrase moral nihilism. So, under the error theory view, ethical statements are truth-at propositions. However, these propositions are always false because moral properties don't exist. So, for example, stealing is wrong. Okay, the error theorist is going to say that would be false. Stealing is right. That's also false. Now, this might sound contradictory, but it's not really. It's just the case that wrong and right don't exist. So those statements are always going to be false because they can't be true. So another example would be if I say, like, David is a Jedi. Like, that's false. Like, I can say anyone's a Jedi, that's always going to be false. I can also say anyone's a Sith, and it's always going to be false because neither Jedi nor Sith exist in this world. Just like the error theorist believes that wrong and right don't exist in this world. So error theorists are often associated with a system named fictionalism, which is a system that would allow us to conserve moral discourse even in the case that moral nihilism is true. So in this case, moral properties like right and wrong would be fictional, but we can still participate in ethical reasoning. We just have to use a moral fiction because you can reason within fictions. So here's an example using Star Wars fiction. So if Luke Skywalker is a Jedi, he can use the Force. Right, this is fictionally true. It's not true in the real world because we don't have a concept in the real world of a Jedi and of a Force, but it's true in the Star Wars universe, right? The second premise, Luke Skywalker is a Jedi, so like both Luke and Jedis are from, Star Wars, so that's true within the Star Wars fiction. And finally, Luke Skywalker can use the Force. So all these propositions are only fictionally the case, but we can still reason using them, and therefore we can still do moral reasoning within a fictionalist framework. That is the strength of the fictionalist framework. So finally we have subjectivism, which is a view that I think a lot of people espouse. It's very common to hear people saying morality is subjective. Sometimes they even say morality is inherently subjective. And yeah, let's look at what that would actually mean, right? So under a subjectivist framework, ethical statements are truth-at propositions, and some of these propositions can be known to be true, but these propositions are made true by the attitudes of people, right? So stealing is wrong, right? That statement just means the proposition, I have a negative attitude towards stealing. So get this. This is different from emotivism because under subjectivism, ethical statements are propositions about attitudes. They are reports about attitudes. They are people saying, I have this attitude. They're not the attitude itself. So they are actually a truth-at. It is actually a proposition that can be truth-at. So I have a negative attitude towards stealing. That can be true or false. It's not the exclamation or the attitude itself, such as boo to stealing. That's non-cognitivist. That can't be true or false. So that's an important thing to note here, because many people get that confused. So here are some problems with subjectivism. So if ethical statements are statements about the attitudes of people. So, for example, stealing is wrong means I have a negative attitude towards stealing. Then it's not clear how exactly they could be embedded or used in moral discourse. So, for example, take this proposition, right? Bob believes that stealing is wrong. Okay, so if stealing is wrong is a statement about people's attitudes, then what does that mean? Does that mean Bob believes that I have a negative attitude towards stealing? Does that mean that Bob believes he has a negative attitude towards stealing? Is that what the proposition Bob believes that stealing is wrong means? So, it seems, at least to me, more like Bob is believing something about stealing, not about people's subjective attitudes towards stealing. And finally, many moral subjectivists will evaluate the truth value of propositions based on the speaker. And I just don't think that this works very well. So let's take, for example, a racist person saying slavery is wrong. So according to the subjectivist, that would actually be objectively wrong because he has a positive attitude towards slavery. He's meant to say slavery is right because that's what he should be doing in moral discourse. He should be representing his own attitude. And because of that proposition is false. And I just don't think that works with how we use moral language, right? So if an anti-racist person says slavery is wrong, then that's true. So like, ethical statements are contingent on the attitudes of their speakers. It's a position people can take. I just don't think that it's a very good model of how we use ethical language and ethical discourse. So thank you to everyone for watching. Like I said, this is a very brief overview. It's just explaining what the positions are. It's not arguing for any positions. It's just explaining what the positions are and what frequent objections to them are. I'm not taking any sides in this video series, but yeah, that's basically a little brief overview of moral anti-realism.